My journey really isn't that exciting, or at least I wouldn't expect other people to see it as anything really that significant. But when I step back, think about where I've come and what I've learned, I recognize that I already have so much to share. This isn't a boastful statement. This is me acknowledging those who have poured into me, invested in me, and built me. And in return, my desire is to pour into everyone else I come in contact with, through words, actions, through my business, and through examples. From others we can learn, and through learning we apply. And through application, we experience growth. 2014 to 2015 were very difficult years for me personally. I struggled with my purpose. I didn't know who I was or where I was going. I felt like I was in a gridlock. And I remember vividly something clicking as I got through the 2016 and 2017 years. Now remember, 2016 was the official launch of TA Targets. We kicked off my business, which started the hardest journey I've ever embarked on. And one thing radically changed throughout the next 2 to 3 years. I began to seek out those ahead of me, and I built a network of friends slowly. These are people who were a few steps ahead of me, and I asked them questions and simply listened. I applied, tested, and refined. And one other thing that changed was my reading habits. I was in a bookstore with my wife, and I remember feeling hungry. I desired so deeply to grow my business, and I desired freedom. I craved forging a different journey than typical people. And on that night, I bought somewhere around 6 books. I committed to learning as much as possible. And while it might seem cliche, what followed was a better understanding of who I am and what my purpose is. Today, we're going to be talking about 6 books that changed my life forever. The first book that I felt deserved being covered is called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And as I read this book, it became immediately clear that I had spent several years pitching people about why my company and products were so great. I kept creating post after post about why our steel targets and products were better, why we were the best company, and why we would succeed. And as I dug into the book, it dawned on me that while I do believe that people love to root for the underdog and want to support good businesses, ultimately great businesses make the story about the customer. And this book, while very simplistic in its message and presentation, woke me up and made me realize that my business is about far more than simply making great products. My products solve problems for people. They encourage community, training, and defensive life. And this book changed how I view our role in our customer and followers' lives. We no longer need to be the superhero in our own story. The One Thing, written by Gary Keller, is another very simple read. And while not a super complex topic, prioritizing the most important tasks early on in the growth of TA was a super difficult thing for me to do. I constantly struggled with balancing super important tasks, wearing multiple hats, and this book not only stresses focusing on the most important things, but it also reminds us that it's not only okay, but it is necessary to say no to other things and people when we are focused on the one thing that we need to be focused on in that moment. This book made it clear to me that I often need to set boundaries for people, including my team, when I'm focused on priority tasks. One way that I began to put this into action was locking my office, putting a sign up, and telling people to not disturb me. It feels weird shutting people out sometimes and shutting out distractions, but it was freeing. Ultimately, I moved my office into another part of the shop where I could even experience more privacy. And as the CEO, I need to be mission focused forward, looking into the next 3, 5, 10 years. And that is impossible to do when you are barraged with different distractions. If you find yourself overwhelmed with too many tasks and are not great at prioritizing the one thing that is most important, this book would definitely be a solid read for you. Extreme ownership was a gift that I received sometime in the 2018 year, and it came at a perfect time as I was struggling with certain situations and how I could work through them. And ultimately, the book really challenged me to take ownership of all situations that I find myself in. Extreme ownership is placing the responsibility for our circumstances on our own shoulders. It's about not making excuses. Some of the realistic examples are simple things like someone on team making a mistake or mishandling a situation. Ultimately, many CEOs or leaders might just place the blame on that individual employee. What the book made me realize is when things go wrong, no matter what is going wrong, they almost always land on my shoulders. Did I communicate properly to my team members? Maybe did we not onboard a new hire properly? Did that new hire not match our culture? Have I even been speaking culture into our team? Have I been leading by example? Ultimately, the buck stops with me. And when you look at our company organization chart, I'm the guy that's at the top, which means all of the different things that happen in the company, I need to take extreme ownership of. No excuses, just ownership. And this book is another simple read. And if you find yourself struggling with your circumstances, I recommend reading this book. Even if your life seems great and you feel like you have it all together, give the book a read. This is a mindset game, and this book addresses our culture's tendency to pass the blame and point to everyone and everything else when things aren't going our way. We can make excuses or we can take ownership. And personally, I choose to take ownership. If that sounds like your mindset, it's probably a good read for you, and it's going to help strengthen your mindset. The Great Game of Business is definitely the most difficult read of the books that I'm talking about today. And to be honest, in the phase that I was in with my business, it was a little bit over my head. But with that being said, a guiding principle that this book has laid out is how managers can encourage team members to take ownership of their roles, set their own goals, and help them grow within the organization. This book also heavily speaks to an open book style policy within the business. And one thing that really struck me through this is the value of team members knowing how their role affects the overall business picture. And the way they manage time, resources, and their schedules affects the outlook of the entire business. How many companies have you worked for or worked around where the employees trash talk CEO or ownership because they don't understand how the business works, or their leadership has done a bad job of communicating how everything works as a system? The reality is most of us are completely ignorant of business until we've gone through it. Leaders, CEOs, owners have an opportunity to teach their team the inner workings of the company. This is a concept that I have implemented here ever since reading this book. Intentional time encouraging team members to take ownership and lead, and also teaching our team members how the business functions and how it affects them and every other team member every single day. As I said, this book took me quite some time to get through, and it is a long read, but I feel like it opened my eyes to a completely new level of transparency within the business. And I highly recommend this book, especially if you are a small business owner. We all see ultra successful people, and we hear their stories going from the bottom and making it to the top. And these stories drive us. They're inspiring. The book Outliers broke down many of my perceptions of how people become successful, and it really pointed to the responsibility of those who make it to reinvest in the next generation of driven people. Outliers lays out the reality that often we are products of our past, our circumstances, and many things that we actually don't control. Now, before you assume that this is a book about passing the buck and making excuses saying that all successful people got lucky or were handed their success, realize that this book isn't saying that at all. In fact, it is simply pointing out trends of successful and unsuccessful people and helping us to better understand that we each are blessed with certain circumstances that can build us if we use them properly. Just one example is the start of my business story. And to go there, we have to rewind all the way back to first or second grade. There was this one day that my mom took me on a walk down the road to the neighbor's pasture. I wanted to go there because I knew they had goats. I wanted to pet their goats. And as we were crossing the concrete bridge on the other side of that pasture, another young boy approached us and introduced himself as Ethan. And ultimately, after that first interaction, we became lifelong friends. I built a relationship with him, with his family. We built trust. and eventually became business partners and started TA Targets together in 2015. Another example is how I was pushed into college and I received a degree that I ended up hating, but I took that skill set and applied that directly to my business. And often we're presented with opportunities that can become advantages with the right mindset. You never know what that relationship from 10 years ago can lead to. And again, I don't buy the victim mentality that it is impossible to go from nothing to something. But if you do have an advantage and you're given a runway, it's also your duty to accept it and conquer it. Then it's your responsibility to pass that torch to somebody else, to offer opportunity for others just like you were offered. And this book changed how I view success and how I view successful people and how they're built. Saved from Success hit me really hard. Dale Partridge discusses his story in this book and how his pursuit of worldly material possessions ultimately broke him. His main goal was to be a millionaire by 30, and he achieved that. And in the process, he describes his story of losing himself, wrecking his business and his marriage, and also having a host of different health problems throughout his journey. Now, I don't entirely agree with everything in this book, but what I do believe is that our mission should drive us more than the material things. And an example is, if money is your only objective, you're gonna miss out on life. Now, I think it's important to be frugal, to invest, to be fiscally responsible, and I also believe that it's okay to buy things and have luxuries and build wealth. I think that these are noble attributes, but in the process, are we building community? Are we investing in others? And are we living ethically? At a time when I thought what I needed was to build wealth, I realized what I needed most was purpose. I needed to find my mission, and I needed to apply my skills, grow, explore, and build. And ultimately, money is the smallest driving force for me in my business journey. I credit some of that mentality shift to this book. Culture screams at us that the consumer lifestyle, parties, money, big houses is how we're going to be happy. I know that wealth is going to make crappy people even more crappy and unhappy and more miserable. Wealth in the hands of mission-driven people can change the world. And this shift was so vitally important in my life. The last 7 years has been a whirlwind of learning and exploring. And I credit all of what I've learned to those who are ahead of me, who have invested in me and who have given me the time to ask questions. I'm not saying that you have to read these books to be successful, but I am saying that having a questioning, curious mindset and being willing to vocalize those questions will help you on your journey. Invest in yourself, learn, grow, and push towards a mission that betters our community and our nation. We need it more than ever, and we need people who are driven by ethics and culture to be leading by example in our world. That's how we take back culture, and that's ultimately how we build a better community.